In Hollywood's golden era, few actors stood as tall, literally and symbolically, as Charlton Heston. He wasn't just a leading man. He was a force, chiseled like granite, king of the biblical epic, and a man so devoted to his craft that his presence could silence a room before he even spoke a line. But while his on-screen persona was carved in stone, his off-screen legacy was etched in something far less polished: conflict. Hidden behind the polished robes of Ben Hur, the stern confidence of the Ten Commandments, and the primal fear of Planet of the Apes was a man who believed in order, in discipline, in hierarchy. And when others didn't share that belief, whether in film, politics, or the future of Hollywood, Charlton Heston didn't back down. These aren't just stories about actors who disagreed. These are stories of the 7 actors Charlton Heston hated, and who may have hated him in return. 1. Marlon Brando. The clash between Charlton Heston and Marlon Brando was more than a feud. It was a war between 2 different worlds. Brando was Hollywood's agent of chaos, rebellious, unpredictable, overflowing with emotional fire. Heston, on the other hand, was the embodiment of discipline. To Brando, acting was an emotional explosion. To Heston, it was a battlefield. Every line was delivered with precision, every camera angle rehearsed. The way he walked on set was how a general marches into war. So when Heston learned Brando had openly mocked him in an interview, saying Heston represented a kind of stale, dead Hollywood, it triggered something deeper than artistic disagreement. Heston fired back, claiming Brando was the most overrated actor of his time, brilliant but lost in himself. Their worlds would have collided in mutiny on the Bounty, but Heston reportedly turned down an offer to appear in the film simply because Brando was involved. Years later, when Brando took a stand against Hollywood by refusing his Oscar, Heston said Brando spit on the very industry that built him. This was never just personal. It was a duel of legacies. 2. Jane Fonda. Some Hollywood rivalries are silent glances across a premiere room. This one was a full-on public brawl during the Vietnam War. America was tearing at the seams, and so was Hollywood. Jane Fonda, bold, fiery, unfiltered, took a stand against the war, against the government, and against the soldiers themselves, in the eyes of some. Charlton Heston was the opposite. He spoke for the country, for authority, for tradition, and against what he called Hollywood radicals. When Jane Fonda traveled to North Vietnam, famously photographed on an anti-aircraft gun used to fire at U.S. planes, Heston exploded. He called her a traitor in pearls. Fonda shot back, calling Heston a mouthpiece for archaic power. At award shows, they avoided each other like poison. On talk shows, they used each other's names like weapons. To the public, it was a bizarre spectacle. Moses versus Hanoi Jane, but in a way, they needed each other. They became living symbols of 2 Americas, one roaring forward, one digging into its past, and neither would ever bend. 3. Burt Reynolds. When Burt Reynolds busted through the doors of 1970s Hollywood with mustache, swagger, and smart-aleck charm, he didn't just become the biggest box office star in America. He became the future. And Charlton Heston hated that future. Heston saw Reynolds as everything wrong with the next generation: vulgar, unserious, undisciplined, and worst of all, beloved. Audiences couldn't get enough. And it burned Heston. One night in the late 1970s, Heston appeared at an event where Reynolds cracked a joke. Heston plays Moses. I play guys your mom hopes you don't date. The crowd roared. Heston didn't. In interviews, Heston began referencing Hollywood's declining moral culture, and more than once named Reynolds indirectly as the face of that decline. Reynolds later fired back in his memoir. Heston was a monument, solid, unmoving, but even monuments get rusty. They lived long enough to outlast their own eras, but their feud never softened. 4. George C. Scott. If Charlton Heston was a general in Hollywood, then George C. Scott was a bomb. Explosive, confrontational, brilliant, and sometimes flat out dangerous. Scott was famous for refusing awards, arguing with directors, and terrifying his co-stars. He believed acting wasn't a performance, it was a possession, a demon that took over the soul. Heston didn't buy it. Scott once mocked Heston at a studio dinner, saying, "Charlton doesn't act, he recites." Heston, enraged, walked out and later told the press he would never work with an actor who confuses madness with art. For a time, they were both up for leading roles in a film about the Roman Empire. Heston threatened to walk if Scott was cast. Scott later said, "Thank God I didn't have to spend 6 months sharing a horse with that marble statue." Call it pride, call it ego, call it gladiatorial rage. Whatever it was, it kept them apart forever. If you're still watching, you're part of a rare crowd, people who remember not just the films, but the people behind them. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe right now. Because Hollywood legends don't fade. They just need the right audience to keep their stories alive. 5. Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison wasn't just arrogant. He was a weapon of arrogance. Stories flooded the studio lots about him humiliating co-stars, barking at assistants, demanding a king's treatment on set. Even his own castmates said he treated every room like it was beneath him. Charlton Heston wasn't impressed. After a tense encounter at a Hollywood dinner, Heston told a reporter, "Harrison may be a star, but that doesn't make him a man." Harrison returned the favor by dismissing Heston as a walking jawline with a Bible. They both knew something fundamental. There wasn't enough room in one town for two legends with that much disdain. 6. Stephen Boyd. Ben Hur is one of the greatest epics ever made, but behind the scenes was a feud just as intense as the chariot race at its center. Stephen Boyd played Messala, the Roman prince who betrays Heston's character. Their chemistry on screen was electric, almost too perfect, because it wasn't acting. It was all real. Boyd resented Heston's coldness, thought he took himself too seriously. Heston called Boyd moody, unsure, and in need of control. The tension made the rivalry between their characters jump right off the screen. Two men, two kingdoms, one pair of reins. When Boyd wasn't cast in the sequel, he claimed Heston had quietly pushed to keep him out. Heston denied it, but the silence said enough. 7. Gene Kelly. Gene Kelly danced across stages. He smiled through rainstorms. He lit up screens with charm. But if you worked with him long enough, the clouds came. Many actors called Gene Kelly one of the most cutting, short-tempered, and egotistical stars in Hollywood. Heston met Kelly early in his career and immediately saw someone he didn't respect. Kelly, for his part, thought Heston was stiff, emotionally frozen. Their disagreement wasn't violent. It wasn't public. It was worse. It was a quiet, mutual hatred that made sure they would never share a single frame of film. Charlton Heston was a man who lived his life by a code. Whether he was holding stone tablets as Moses or riding into war as Judah Ben Hur, Heston believed in the ideals he played on screen: honor, discipline, strength, and above all, respect. What makes his story fascinating isn't just that he clashed with other stars. It's that each feud pulled back a different layer of who Heston really was. He wasn't just fighting actors. He was fighting what he saw as the decay of Hollywood itself. Take Brando, for instance. Heston saw in him all the raw talent in the world. Wasted. A man who abandoned tradition and spit in the face of the system that made him a legend. To Heston, Brando wasn't just irresponsible. He was proof that Hollywood was losing its soul. Or Jane Fonda, who seemed to enjoy burning the bridges Heston spent a lifetime defending. Where she saw rebellion, Heston saw betrayal. Where she demanded change, he demanded order. The conflict between them wasn't about movies. It was about identity and legacy. And then there was Burt Reynolds, The face of a new Hollywood Heston didn't understand. A Hollywood with less class, less respect, and according to Heston, less purpose. Reynolds represented a world where movie stars didn't stand for anything. They just played everything. Each rivalry wasn't random. It was personal, carefully built over years. Heston wasn't the kind of man who made enemies easily. But once you crossed him, you stayed crossed.